Hey. Karibu sana. Welcome in. This is Lost in Our 40s, our podcast by women for women, where we talk about everyday stuff, life, and how to make life easier for ourselves. Welcome on in. So, today's topic is interesting. We're talking about racism. Go figure. Racism. So I feel like I need to give a bit of background towards this. And this could be racism, tribalism, any other kind of ism where people don't like other people. But hold on, let's hold on to that one for a bit. So I was reading a book, Untamed, by Glennon Doyle. And she has a part in that book where she talks about this, and I thought she brought it out so brilliantly. And I'd also seen it in a book by Richard C. Schwartz, No Bad Parts, where he was also talking about racism. And honestly, they have the same perspective. What they both say, and they're both white writers, and they're both talking about how we all have been affected by the racial discrimination that has happened within our lifetimes. And this stems from media, from life, from everything. But it's not possible to live in today's society and not have been affected by it in some shape or form. And it's something that is possibly taboo to speak about. It's something that we probably don't think too much about as having affected us. But this silence creates a space for it to grow. We don't necessarily notice it. We are not consciously aware of it. No one wants to be racist. No one wants to hate other people. No one wants to be tribal. No, you don't consciously want to do it. But because you have been brought up in the life, we are in 2024, however old you are, you have been brought up in this society, it is almost impossible to not have been affected by it, unless you lived in those societies that have been untouched by the rest of the world. And what they say is that in both cases, they say that you need to address it head on, because it's something that's happening at a lower level within your life. And if you don't address it head on, then it affects you without you noticing. And I mean, I also want to tie it in with Michelle Obama in her book, The Light We Bring. I hope that's the title of the book. She talks about this, but now from the Black perspective, in terms of having been. She gives a story, and it's a story of herself. She was. I'm going to butcher this story. I don't really. She was invited to the mayor's palace for dinner or something like that because she had achieved something or other. Sorry, Michelle. I don't remember, but I remember this. The story struck me because what happened is that when she went with her parents, and when they reached the event location, they were driving in, and there was a guy at the door, a black guy at the door, and he said that no, that they were in the wrong place. I think he was black. They said that either way, they were told that you were in the wrong place. You don't belong. This is not where you should be. Why? Because the expectation was, I think it was a mostly white community, and the expectation is that only white people would be attending such an event. So they must be wrong. They do not belong. They should go away. And that was the striking thing. So they insisted, and they managed to get in. But she was rather young. So this was a teaching to her at a very young age that there is a perception from simply a color dimension of spaces that she does belong to and spaces that she does not belong to. And this she was taught very young, and it was notable that this is something that is perpetuated as well by black people. And that's part of it because it's been a little ingrained. So the person who was at the door, a little ingrained without too much thinking, it's this understanding that these spaces are for other people because we are lower than, we are less than, we do not belong in these places. And it's a powerful topic because, and forgive me all others, but for this situation, I'll just talk about black and white. And I absolutely appreciate that it goes much, much bigger than that. But I'll talk about it from the black and white perspective, because that is also the reality that I lived in. Because when I was young, I lived in Paris. Only, I think, there were two black families in a white school. And that was, I had my own issues. There were bullies. There were two bullies. I was fat and I was black. So really, my life wasn't all that great. But I remember just these two guys who used to bully me about it. And what they tell me is they just tell me a lot of nasty things. And to some extent, because I grew up in that neighborhood, but then after that, I grew up in that situation. Then after that, I moved to Kenya, where everyone is black, and that was good for me. Well, not everyone. We do have a few white people, but they're not that many. So the vast majority of people, when you're walking around the streets, are black. And then I felt back at home. So I had always assumed that this is something that doesn't disturb me. Why would it? It was something that happened when I was young, and then I got over it. So reading all these books has been helpful, and also understanding the notion that this is something that is a construct that society has just been teaching. So yes, media, I always like mentioning the TV. But there's more than that. There's just, look at it. It's easy to do in the male female dimension. You're looking at men and women in terms of leadership. How many women do you see in leadership? So it's a bit of the same thing also with the black and white. Look at international companies. Who are they? Who are in leadership more often than not? And even sometimes, even take the example of Kenya. In Kenya, you do have expat leaders who are brought in, and part of the teaching there, at whatever age the person watching this is there has been a teaching that white people are better leaders than black people. There you go. And it's it's not a conversation that you're having around the dinner table. There's no one telling you this, but it's just these subtle things that you are seeing that are bringing this perspective into your life, and you don't know it. It's again those things that just go over back to the filing cabinet in the back of your mind. You're not necessarily aware of it. It's not something that you have sat down and said, look at me. I am black and therefore I am less. No, it's not that. And super interestingly, I was very happy to go to the Smithsonian African American Museum. I don't know what the official term is for this place in Washington D.C. And it's a fascinating history of black in slavery and Africa, from the slaves coming from the roots of Africa and that kind of thing. And I was astounded, first of all, to see that in the 1500s you'd have diplomats, African diplomats, going over to Europe to negotiate and discuss things of importance. I was mind blown, because this is something that I just never used to see. I'd never come across that notion before. And that's the reality, that African communities were well off. We just had a lot going on, but then it's something that we didn't necessarily see. But what I wanted to mention there is something that I have deep down always thought, that the terms black and white were created. Black and white were terms, just that, black people and white people. They were terms created to begin the subjugation of black people to enable slavery. Because before that, I guess everyone was just people. You on both sides of the divide. In my Kenyan community, I'm sure there wasn't a question of color. No, it wasn't a thing, because everyone around you looked like you. In the white community, again, same thing. But now you have this notion of black and white, and it became a vilified term, because then everything dark, everything black. Black was dirty, black was shame, black was bad. White was angelic, white was wonderful, white was pure. So you see that becomes the beginning of this ingraining of a differentiation of people. And that, I think, is a perfect example of how it permeates in society today. Because of exactly that, it's invisible. If you just have terms that draw up notions because of blackness and whiteness, can you imagine how we are going through life being forced to take on a burden of racial disparity, whether or not we believe in it. So I agree in the black example. The white example is what we saw during Black Lives Matter. This whole notion of people who could not understand why there would be a movement towards Black Lives Matter. And I was very curious about it. I was very curious as to why a group of people would not understand a need for setting up the importance of Black people as people, because that's what Black Lives Matter was about. And of course, there was the debate that all lives matter and everyone is important and everyone is equal, but that takes away from the fact that there is something happening to a certain community that is not happening to the other community. And that's how I came to, after, with all this reading and looking into it, what I came to understand was that without this realization that there is some form of software that has been uploaded into all of us that has been creating this dynamic of who is better than who. And I'm talking about black and white, but I'd also want to take it to the tribal dimension for my country, Kenya, and for other African countries that do have some tribal warfare. And it's really the same kind of thing. We grow up, whatever tribe you are. I presume for our children now it's going to be much better because there's a lot of mixing of tribes. But you grow up hearing a certain storyline, whether or not you really know that you're hearing it or really believe in it or want to be part of it. Because I've also been very curious why the country degenerates into tribal warfare every 5 years. Whenever there's elections, there's going to be that's when people suddenly realize that you're from this tribe, you're from that tribe. The rest of the 5 years, we're fine. But the reason that politicians are able to spark that flame is because there's already something, there's an ember. There was something that was already sizzling at the back. And this is the flame that they're just, what's the word? Fanning to grow bigger. And I say all this to invite you to look at yourself and see that this is something that might be sitting within you, that is likely sitting within you. If you've never looked at it, then it's likely sitting within you. There's a view, if it's black-white, as a black person, you might see yourself as inferior. If you're a white person, you might see yourself as superior. And not because you're a bad person, but because this is something that has been taught into you. Not because you're defective, but because this is something that has been taught for such a long time that it stopped being a teaching, it started becoming a reality of sorts, and you actually need to fight against it, actively fight against it, to be able to stand up and say, no, I have improved. Now is better. Now things are better for me. I see things differently. And part of it is engaging with the opposite. If you're black, engage with white. If you're white, engage with black. But also try to see into yourself. Try to find within yourself, and I'm asking myself how you do this, how to pull out these, they're like fish bones. They're very small and very thin and very fine. That you will not necessarily, fish bones in fillet is what I mean, because they're not meant to be there. You don't, they're very fine, so you're not necessarily aware of it because they just go nicely within the scenery. And perhaps watching movies, I don't know, if you're watching movies about black, white, something like that, and trying to understand the feelings that move within you. What do you feel about it? How do you engage with it? That might be a way. Then it might also be a way to, especially from the tribal perspective, reading books about these other tribes, and books authored by people from other tribes as well might be a good way to do it. Depending, I don't know to what extent that helps, might depend on what the book is about. But going out of your comfort zone and just trying to touch into these other areas, maybe listening to TV. You won't understand what they're saying, but it might, listening to the language might jolt something within you. So these are just things. It's important to understand these things about ourselves. We are not all rainbow and butterflies all the time. We are not just sunshine. There are elements of us that we might not like ourselves, and we do not necessarily bring them up to the fore. That's what we call the shadow. We don't bring them up to the fore, but it's important to know that they exist. Then that way, when you won't find yourself in a mob justice situation being the one killing a man on the street. Mob justice, they say you're carried away by the euphoria of the situation. But if you're aware that you have these tendencies within you, you won't just find yourself there doing strange and crazy things because a part of you that you have been suppressing has come out. I know that that is a very drastic example, but it sounds a little drastic, but a little of what happened in the George Floyd situation. Well, maybe not, but yeah. So my invitation to you, regardless, black, white, tribes, or any other thing, there could be any other community or group that you have found yourself, you might be less than normal with. You don't like them, if I put it bluntly, and you don't necessarily know. So an invitation to dig deep and see these things about yourself. Thank you. As always, I appreciate you. I appreciate your time with me. And until next time, bye-bye.